So, how do you talk about sensitive topics in academia? There's all sorts of sensitive topics. I live in the state of Florida right now. Oh boy. And yeah, everything is sensitive these days. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Somebody can be interpreting it in a different way and thinking about it in such a way that they get, they're everybody all up in airs. And I think the key thing is to remember that you just tell a journey of what scientists and researchers actually went through with all of this, without the journey, right? So I think about something like Darwin, right? I think if you just present and go through, and it doesn't necessarily sound so scary, but like all of these people, all of these scientists and researchers from many years ago have gone through the exact same moments. Yes, it might seem like a little bit more daunting and scary these days, but they've all gone through this, right? So think about somebody like Darwin, right? Like, what does it actually take to sort of convince somebody of something, that might be possible? Is honestly, you come at it as like you don't know what the answer is, and we don't know. Nobody knows what the answer is, right? And one thing doesn't preclude the other in any sort of way. Like evolution doesn't preclude something else happening, right? But the key thing is to sort of stop and think about, like, hey, you know what? Why don't we just look at the sort of weird anomalies? And that's what science is about. That's what, doing research is about, is that there's all sorts of weird anomalies that happen. Stuff like, hey, you have sort of this conception of what a nuclear family looks like, right? Mom and dad, and two kids. Well, then you start breaking it down and looking at, like, what does a real family look like? Right? And you start breaking it down. You start looking at all of the statistics and stuff. Families are a mess at best, right? Like real families are a giant mess, and the ones that aren't are, weird anomalies, right? The nuclear family itself is a weird anomaly, how you might think about it. So, like all of these sort of moments, you just use it as a moment of like, hey, let's look at the natural world. Let's look at what actually happens and think about it. And it's not like nobody else has gone through this before, right? Like all of the mechanisms that exist within academia are often to sort of protect people because they've gone through that stuff before, right? The whole tenure system and all that kind of stuff is sort of a pipe dream to protect people from, saying things that are uncomfortable. There's like things in terms of the world, right? The world, how we think about it, and the world of what actually is, are often very different. And the reason why we don't like to think about certain things is because they're uncomfortable. I mean, all of the things that are uncomfortable are, taboo, right? So it's death, sex, some of the goriness of birth, right? Like, unusual, anything to do with any of that kind of stuff, right? Like just things that are naturally, we don't like to sort of talk about. One thing that I sort of think about, so I've got these puppies here, right? I don't want to show you that one because she's doing the thing that I was going to talk about, right? So if you look at puppies and dogs, when they go poop or pee, so my one dog, this one right here, she just went pee. They turn the opposite direction from you. They also kind of like go as far away from you as possible. It's uncomfortable for everybody to talk about this kind of stuff and to do these kind of things, including animals, right? There is, evolutionary reasons for all of this kind of stuff, right? And I just want you to be well aware, if you start looking at the natural world, you start seeing all these kind of connections. And when you see these connections that are uncomfortable to talk about, well, sometimes you ease into the conversation, right? Like I wouldn't start jumping in and start talking about some really uncomfortable things about sex, right? Like that's yeesh. But talking about thinking of what does gender mean for people, right? What does that actually look like? What is it that how does each individual person think about sort of stereotypes that we have for gender, right? Like, I mean, I think about myself, and man, I've got a lot of masculine qualities, lots, but I also have a lot of feminine qualities as well. And you look at everybody, right? Like every man that exists, they all have that kind of stuff, right? And same goes with women, right? Like I know plenty of people, women, that are very competitive, which is not necessarily like a feminine trait in any sort of way. So, the thing is just start breaking down the world and thinking about how the world actually is, right? So I teach this whole section on behavioral strategy, and it's an interesting topic, right? Because we are taught about how how the world should be and all this kind of stuff, and in strategy and economics. And when you go and actually tell people, to do these things, they never listen. Nobody does it. It's honestly, it's just a bunch of hocus pocus garbage, as far as I'm concerned. But when I start talking about like people and real things, right? So the one thing that I like to talk about is like, how come nobody, if all of this stuff is how you get ahead and you got to perform and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, how come nobody puts up their hand in the classroom, right? How come people just sit there? How come they don't speak up in class, right? Like all of those kind of things is what it takes to be a great leader, all of that kind of stuff, right? So, if that was true, right, then people would be jumping up and doing all these kind of things. We know what it takes to be a great leader and to make lots of money and all that kind of stuff. People would be jumping up, and nobody does. And why is that the case, right? And if we start breaking down, looking at like human nature and what's going on, you really start figuring out like, hey, you know what? People are just people. And we should be really talking about the average person rather than some supernatural person, right? And I think that's where we need to start talking about and going to is, hey, why don't we just start having conversations about what people actually do and start breaking down in terms of those sensitive topics. The other thing is just say it, right? If they're going to fire you, so what? You can go get a better job anyways. The jobs that you get in industry pay more. They end up, you have better job satisfaction, all of those kind of things. Like it's just uniformly better. So what are you afraid of? Somebody like just being, I don't know. I just think it's like, just start talking and being open, right? And I think that's it. What are you actually afraid of? If people start taking you into a different direction and doing like not so great things to you in terms of how they're interpreting you and stuff, it's their problem at the end of the day. It's not your problem, right? You're just trying to be honest. You're trying to be your person. You're just trying to be you, right? And as long as you approach it with absolute sensitivity, honesty, and being yourself, like really be sensitive with these things. These are really uncomfortable conversations with a lot of people. So just, know that when you're going through it, have some fun and enjoy it more than using it as a moment to sort of redefine somebody. Like that's nuts, right? But just kind of be playful as if you're a great scientist like Charles Darwin and tackling one of these difficult conversations that we have in society. And we all approach, all of us, every single researcher and scientist is doing something that is difficult to talk about. Me talking about the profit equation, revenue minus costs, you know what people find difficulty with that? I know it seems stupid, but people find that difficult to talk about. Where do you get revenue? Where do you get costs? Or what are your costs? Those are really tricky things to often talk about. And it seems stupid, right? Like it seems like stupid is like in the sense like that's a really simple thing, and why would people be upset with it? There's always people upset with things. So you just approach it with sensitivity, be, kind, generous, and be curious. That's it. And present the case of what the natural world actually looks like. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.